When my wife insisted we go to that dinner, I didn't think much of it. We'd been to dozens like it before. But something about that night felt different, the way she looked at him, the silence when it mattered most. I didn't react then. But 3 weeks later, I ended the marriage. The dinner was my wife's idea. 3 weeks later, I filed for divorce. That detail matters. Not because it changes anything about what happened, but because I've spent the past 18 months thinking about responsibility. Who holds it, who ducks it, who pretends they don't understand the concept, and I've gotten particular about origins. Who started what? Whose idea was whose? Renata Caswell had been Lauren's closest friend for 11 years. They met at a fundraiser for a children's hospital and became inseparable in the way some women do when they recognize a shared appetite for a certain social life. Houses big enough to host dinner parties. Restaurants you call 6 weeks out. The comfortable performance of success that people in their circle had refined into something close to an art form. I never disliked Renata. That matters. She was smart. Genuinely funny when she forgot she was performing. And she had a bluntness I respected even when it was pointed at me. Her husband, Philip Caswell, founded a mid-sized commercial insurance brokerage. He was 53, 2 years older than me. And he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built something real, and had decided this fact entitled him to take up more room than everyone else. Physically, conversationally, socially, Philip expanded to fill whatever container he was in. I'd been managing Philip for 7 years the way you manage any person in your social orbit who wraps aggression in humor. You acknowledge it without feeding it. You stand your ground without turning it into a thing. You understand that how he behaves reveals more about him than he'd once stated plainly. And you hold that understanding quietly, because holding information you don't deploy always gives you an advantage over the person who can't stop deploying his. The dinner was at their house in Kenilworth. 8 people. Renata and Philip. Lauren and me. 2 other couples I knew in passing. And a man named Garrett Fowler. I'd heard Garrett Fowler's name 4 times in the 3 months before that night. Lauren mentioned him twice, in connection with a project at her interior design firm. Renata dropped his name once, described him as a developer with interesting projects and good taste. Philip mentioned him once too, said he was someone you need to know, which in Philip's vocabulary meant the man had money and was willing to move it around. He was 46. I looked him up after Lauren's second mention, which is what I do with information that feels incomplete. He'd built a residential and boutique commercial development company over 15 years, starting with 1 renovation in Lincoln Park and growing it into a portfolio of 42 finished projects and 11 in progress, according to his firm's website. He wasn't married. He drove a dark green Porsche Cayenne, which I know because it was parked in Renata's driveway when we pulled up and I noticed it. I notice cars. I notice most things. It's how I process the world, as data points contributing to a larger picture. Lauren had dressed carefully that night. Not that she ever didn't. She was always put together. But the care had a different texture to it. The extra 20 minutes upstairs after I was already in my coat. And the dress, not the navy one she told me about earlier that week. This one was green, a shade that demanded more thought about skin tone and lighting and effect. She wore it like she'd considered how it would land. I didn't mention the change. I told her she looked beautiful, which was true. And I meant it the way I'd always meant it. We drove to Kenilworth in a quiet car. The quiet felt normal to me. I suspect it felt normal to her for entirely different reasons. The first hour of dinner went the way first hours always go. Wine doing its opening work. Conversation skating across wide surfaces. I talked to Renata about a garden renovation she was considering. I talked to one of the other husbands, a guy named Terrence, last name gone from my memory now, about the city's infrastructure bond proposal. We both had opinions. It gave us 20 minutes of real exchange. Garrett Fowler sat across from me. He was a physically present man who'd learned to use that as part of how he communicated. The way he filled a chair. The way he leaned in when someone was speaking, like his attention itself was a gift being offered. He was charming. I'll give him that without hedging. He had the kind of charm that reaches almost everyone in a room because it's built on very careful observation of what each person responds to. He'd been talking to Lauren since we sat down. Not only to her. Not in a way that was blatant. But with a steadiness and a focus that, if you were paying attention, was different from the attention he gave anyone else at that table. Lauren was lit up. She laughed at things he said with a fullness I hadn't seen from her in a while. She touched her collarbone twice. That's something she does when she's genuinely engaged, not performing engagement but actually in it. I noticed the collarbone. I noticed the dress. I noticed the 20 minutes. I noticed the 4 times his name had come up in 3 months. And I placed all of it alongside everything else I'd been quietly accumulating for about 7 months, since scattered data points had arranged themselves into something that clearly wasn't random anymore. The turn came during the main course. Philip had been drinking before we arrived, which was standard. Alcohol didn't change him so much as turn the volume up on what was already there. His humor, which sober was just pointed, got sharper after a couple drinks and less concerned about where it cut. He said, into one of those lulls where the whole table can hear, "So, Owen, Garrett tells me your firm's doing mostly residential these days. Smaller ticket stuff." My firm. Let me explain. I'm a structural engineer. I've been a principal at a mid-sized firm for 9 years. Before that, 20 years at 2 larger firms. We do residential and commercial, roughly a 40-60 split favoring commercial. The residential work isn't small ticket, it's high-end custom builds and major renovations. But what Philip was doing, shrinking residential into something lesser, was just his way of drawing a hierarchy when he didn't have a sharper tool. We're diversified, I said. Residential part of the mix. Philip shrugged. Nothing wrong with it. Somebody's got to do the kitchen extensions. There was laughter. The careful kind. The kind people produce when someone's been a little too sharp and nobody's sure if it's supposed to be a joke. 2 of the guests managed thin smiles. Renata studied her plate. Lauren said nothing. Kitchen extensions are actually an underrated structural challenge, I said. More load-bearing complexity per square foot than most commercial spaces. That was a real fact and also a way of turning the knife sideways instead of pulling it out. I wasn't going to fight at Renata's dinner table, but I also wasn't going to flinch. There's a wide gap between refusing to engage and backing down. And I've always known exactly where that gap is. Philip was already moving on. Of course. He'd made his point. He didn't need a response. But Garrett Fowler had been watching the exchange. I actually looked at your firm's work before tonight, he said, addressing the table at large, casual sounding in a way that wasn't casual at all. You did the structural on the Halstead commercial conversion a couple years ago, right? Yes. Good project. Clean work. Thanks. For residential. He smiled when he said it. The kind of smile designed to look like friendly ribbing. You could laugh it off or you could push on it, your choice. He watched me to see which way I'd go. I gave a short laugh. Not because it was funny. Because I was gathering something and I wasn't ready to spend it yet. Philip, now riding the momentum Garrett had created, said, "You know what your problem is, Owen?" Nobody had been discussing my problems. But Philip continued as though we had. You've always played it too safe. 9 years at your firm and you're still not the biggest name on any project you touch. Engineers never are. You're the guys who tell everyone what they can't do. He was enjoying himself. He'd found an audience in Garrett. And having an audience made Philip dangerous in the low-grade way Philip was always dangerous. Lauren didn't say a word. I looked at her for 1 second. She was staring at her wine. That's an interesting take, Philip, I said. Though I'd say knowing what holds and what doesn't is generally more useful at the end of a project than being the loudest name at the beginning of one. Sounds like something you'd put on a website, Philip said. Garrett leaned in. To be fair, Owen, Philip's got a point. Developers are the ones who shape what gets built. Engineers tell us whether our vision is feasible. Important work. But it's reactive, right? You're always responding to somebody else's idea. Same warm smile. Same words with their edges sanded down just enough to pass as collegial. Around the table, the other guests had gone quiet in that way people do when they realize they're watching something and aren't sure what category it belongs in. Structurally speaking, that's accurate, I said. We respond to a proposed design and determine whether it can exist. When we say it can't, the project dies or changes. When we say it can, it gets built. I've been comfortable with that arrangement for 20 years. But it's always someone else's arrangement, Garrett said. Someone else's vision. You're the one making their idea possible. Or impossible, I said. Which is also a kind of power. Something behind his eyes shifted. The smile held, but the thing animating it changed, like late afternoon light moving across a room. Same source, different angle. Philip raised his glass. I'll drink to that. Somebody's got to say no. He had the satisfied look of a man who believes he's just delivered a summary. The man who says no. That's Owen Marsh. It landed the way he wanted it to. A small, tidy dismissal. A man reduced to his refusals. The kind of label designed to stick in a social setting, to become the phrase people repeat later without remembering where they heard it first. Lauren said nothing. She was looking at Garrett. Not obviously. Not in any way the table would have caught. But I caught it. And in that moment, I was the only person whose attention mattered. Renata tried to smooth things over. I think what Philip means is... No, Philip said. I mean exactly what I said. Renata stopped. Garrett spread his hands. For what it's worth, Owen, the no is important. Magnanimous. Generous. The tone of a man handing out credit, which is its own brand of condescension. I need someone who can tell me no before I sink 4 million into a building that falls down. He smiled at Lauren when he said it. She smiled back. You've never worked with my firm, I said. Not yet. He said it to Lauren as much as to me. The rest of dinner happened. I ate. I talked to people. I participated in conversations that drifted away from the earlier territory. By external measures, I was having a fine evening. Philip drank more and spread his energy around the table in a way that made everyone equally targeted and therefore nobody especially so. Garrett talked about a boutique hotel conversion in the West Loop with the ease of a man who understood that describing his work was its own form of display. I watched Lauren. She laughed 3 more times at things Garrett said. She talked about her own firm twice. And both times Garrett followed up with questions that were too specific to be spontaneous. He'd done his homework on her business before tonight, which confirmed something I'd already suspected about how he'd prepared for this dinner. She touched her collarbone once more. We left at 10:40. The drive home took 26 minutes. Lauren debriefed the evening the way she always did. Renata's food. Something someone's wife had said. The garden renovation. She didn't mention the conversation about my firm. She didn't acknowledge Philip's comments or Garrett's follow-ons. 26 minutes and not a single word that recognized what had happened at that table. What did you think of Fowler? I asked. Seems interesting. Could be good for the firm. Renata says he redoes whole spaces, not just structural, the full interior program. Might be a referral source. Probably. Did Philip get under your skin tonight? He was a lot. Philip is always a lot. You handled it well. I always do. She heard something in that. I saw her adjust in her seat, a small shift. She looked at the road. You're quiet, she said. It's late. We got home. Went to bed. I lay on my side of the mattress in the dark, listening to her breathing ease towards sleep. I knew the rhythm of it so well I could have picked it out of a crowd. And while I listened, I thought about the evening with the same focus I bring to any structural problem that lands on my desk. Where are the load points? Where does the stress concentrate? Where does the thing fail if nobody intervenes? I've been running that analysis for 7 months. I should describe what 7 months of preparation actually looks like. Not the dramatic version. Not some movie montage where the betrayed husband lines up his pieces on a board. Real preparation is boring. It's appointments and phone calls and document requests and account reviews. It's a folder on a laptop growing one item at a time until it holds everything it needs to hold. I'd first sat down with a family law attorney named Claire Ashworth back in March, 7 months before the dinner. I found her the way I find any professional. Research, credential review, published outcomes, a consultation to assess competence before committing. She was 51, 22 years in practice, known for precision in asset characterization cases. That was what I needed. At our first meeting, I told her I wasn't sure I'd ever need her services. I told her I wanted to fully understand my position, everything about my marriage and my finances, so that if circumstances ever forced a decision, I wouldn't be scrambling to figure out what I had and what I didn't. She leaned back. That might be the most sensible first meeting I've had with a prospective client in 11 years. We started that day. Here's what the asset landscape looked like. Lauren and I had been married 8 years. Before the marriage, I'd bought a 2-flat in Logan Square, paid cash, savings I'd built over a decade of working plus a modest inheritance from an uncle who'd died the year before. Title in my name only. After we got the house together, I'd rented out the lower unit. Rental income went into a dedicated account, my name only, which paid the building's taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Nothing else went in or came out. No marital money ever touched that building. Not once. Not a dollar. Claire went through the records at our second meeting and said, "The 2-flat is clean. Separate property. No question. You've maintained the boundary with unusual discipline." "I'm a structural engineer," I said. "I don't mix load-bearing systems." She paused, pen in hand. "I'm writing that down. Market value on the building, approximately $620,000. No mortgage. That full equity was mine and would stay mine. Next was retirement. I'd been putting money into a 401k since I was 26. Premarital balance at the time of the wedding was $107,000, backed up by 17 years of annual statements I'd kept. Hard copies in a locked filing cabinet at home, digital scans on a personal drive. Current total balance sat around $340,000. The premarital portion plus its proportional growth came to roughly $160,000 in protected separate property. Then the firm. I owned a 31% stake in the partnership. The firm existed before I joined. I bought my stake 7 years ago using personal savings and a business loan in my name only. The purchase closed 2 months before the wedding. The operating agreement, which Claire requested and which I had, contained a standard clause our partnership attorney had insisted on. The interest wasn't transferable or assignable to a non-partner without unanimous consent from the other partners. Boilerplate language for professional partnerships. It had nothing to do with marital planning. It had just always been there. Claire read the agreement and said, "The partnership interest is protected by the assignment restriction. Any marital claim would be limited to appreciation in value during the marriage that's attributable to marital effort. The underlying asset is separate." The firm's most recent annual valuation, a document I had routine access to, put it at roughly $4.2 million. My 31%, about $1.3 million. Most of that value predated the marriage or grew from market forces independent of it. Then the house. We'd bought it 6 years into the marriage. Down payment split evenly, $40,000 each from our joint savings, $80,000 total. Remaining mortgage around $280,000. Current market value approximately $740,000. That left about $460,000 in equity, all of it marital, all of it subject to equitable distribution. Joint savings, $44,000. Marital. My individual savings, an account I'd always maintained apart from our joint finances, $61,000. Funded entirely from premarital savings and overflow from the separate rental account. Never mixed with marital funds. 8 years of statements on file. Claire walked me through the full picture at our third meeting. She drew a line down a yellow legal pad. Left side, protected. Right side, marital. Protected, the 2-flat at $620,000. Separate retirement at $160,000. The firm stake at $1.3 million, minus whatever marital appreciation claim might stick. She estimated that at under $200,000 given the premarital basis. Individual savings at $61,000. Total protected, conservatively, about $2.1 million. Marital, house equity at $460,000, split equitably. Joint savings at $44,000, split. The marital slice of retirement. Total marital estate, roughly $520,000, before adjustments. Then she asked something I'd been waiting for. In this state, equitable distribution doesn't have to mean 50-50. The court considers each party's contributions, the length of the marriage, professional sacrifices. Has your wife made professional sacrifices during the marriage? No. She's run her own firm for 6 years. It was operating before we married. She hasn't scaled back her career for the marriage or for family obligations. Does she have a firm of her own? Yes. Sole owner of an LLC holding the interior design business. What's it worth? Based on her most recent tax filing, which I have access to as a joint filer, Revenue runs about $400,000 a year. Standard service business multiples put the firm's value somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000. Claire set down her pen. That's a marital asset. It offsets her claim on yours. I know. If her firm is valued at $700,000 and the marital estate is $520,000, the distribution math shifts considerably. Depending on how the court weighs things, she could end up owing you an offset rather than the other way around. I'd considered that. She studied me. It was a look she gave me several times during those months, the look of someone recalculating what kind of client they're dealing with. When do you want to file? Not yet. What are you waiting for? I want the picture to be complete before I act on it. Filing before I understand the full structure is like pulling a load-bearing wall before you've mapped what it's holding up. How will you know when you have enough? I'll know. The picture became complete about 3 weeks after the dinner at Renata's. Back in June, 2 months after my first meeting with Claire, I'd hired a private investigator. His name was Arthur Kells. 21 years of experience, 14 in private practice after leaving the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I didn't hire him for surveillance. Our state has particular rules about that. And I'd researched them thoroughly before engaging anyone. I hired him for documentation of publicly observable behavior and for digital forensics work that needed a licensed professional behind it to be admissible. Arthur understood something fundamental: the difference between what you can see and what you can use. He never produced anything that couldn't be used. Over 4 months, he built a record. 41 documented instances of contact between Lauren and Garrett Fowler. 36 were verified location overlaps drawn from public social media posts, business calendar entries, and event attendance records. 5 were Arthur's own direct observations, times and places where the two of them were together in ways that had no professional explanation. Those 5 included 2 dinners at restaurants unconnected to either of their businesses, and a Saturday afternoon at an outdoor gallery event in the West Loop that had nothing to do with architecture or development or anything except wanting to be somewhere together. I'd reviewed Arthur's file twice before that dinner at Renata's. I'd sat across from Garrett Fowler that night, already knowing what I knew. I'd listened to Philip's jabs and Garrett's polished follow-ups and Lauren's silence with the stillness of someone who already holds the blueprint of the situation and is simply waiting for the right procedural moment to act on it. 3 weeks after the dinner, Arthur delivered the last piece. It was, from a legal standpoint, the single most useful document in the entire file. Through legally permissible channels, Arthur had identified that Lauren and Garrett Fowler had co-signed a lease on a studio workspace in Fulton Market. The lease was under Fowler Development's name. It had been filed with the city as part of a business license application. Public record. Both their signatures on it. A shared commercial lease. A documented financial entanglement that predated any confrontation. I called Claire that morning. I'm ready. I'll draft the petition. She filed on a Wednesday. Lauren was served at her studio that afternoon at 3:15 by a process server Arthur had arranged. I know the time because Claire texted me confirmation. I was standing in a half-finished commercial space in River North, discussing a steel beam installation with a project manager who wanted to know about load tolerances. I answered his question. Then I read Claire's text. Then I put my phone back in my pocket and finished the walkthrough. 17 minutes later, Lauren called. I didn't pick up. I sent a text, in a meeting. Home by 7. She was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. No dinner made, which wasn't unusual. But she was holding herself together with effort you could see from across the room. I got served with divorce papers today, she said. I know. At the office. In front of my assistant. I'm sorry about the location. That was the process server's call, not mine. Owen. She stopped. Took a breath. You could have talked to me. I've been talking to you for 8 years, Lauren. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. I've known for 7 months. And before I had specifics, I was already building the framework to act when I did. We're past the point where a conversation changes the outcome. 7 months. Roughly. And you've just been, what? Living here. Going to work? Having dinner with me. I've been preparing. There's not a lot else to do during preparation. She sat down at the kitchen table. Looked at her hands. The filing, she said. What does it? She stopped, started again. What are you claiming? Claire's included full financial disclosure. You need your own attorney to review it. I'd suggest doing that before we get into specifics. Are you being fair? In what you're asking for? I'm being accurate. I'm not claiming anything that isn't documentable mine. The house. Marital. It gets sold or someone buys the other out. Claire's petition proposes a sale, proceeds divided equitably based on each party's documented contributions. Your firm will be valued and accounted for. Same as yours. My firm is, she stopped. Worth somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000, I said, based on standard multiples for a service business of its size and revenue. It's a marital asset. It'll be appraised by a neutral evaluator and treated the same way all the other marital assets are treated. I watched the implication arrive. You could see it land. Her firm was valuable. Her firm was going to be on the table the same way she'd assumed only my assets would be. Whatever math she'd been running in her head, and I could partially reconstruct it from something Renata had mentioned to me in passing 2 months back, hadn't included her own business as a liability. You're going to go after my firm, she said. The court will determine equitable distribution of all marital assets. I'm not going after anything. I'm presenting documentation. Since when do you have attorneys? March. She was quiet for a long time. Then, what about Garrett? What about him? Is he in the filing? The filing contains a factual account of relevant circumstances. Claire can walk your attorney through the contents. So yes. The filing says what it says, Lauren. Owen, this is going to. I know what it's going to do. I've known for 7 months. She looked at me then. Not the look of someone who's been caught, exactly. More like someone who's been living in one version of reality and has just been dropped into a different one with no warning. I didn't think you knew, she said. I know you didn't. You never said a word. Saying something before I was ready to act on it would have been the wrong sequence. What does that even mean? It means I don't pull walls before I know what they're supporting. She stared at me. I have no idea what that means. I know, I said. That's okay. I made dinner that night. Pasta. I've always made it better than she did. And that was never a point of contention between us. I set one place. She'd gone to the other room. I ate, washed the dishes, and went to my office. I opened the laptop and looked at the folder. 7 months of documentation. Arthur's 41 entries. Claire's complete file summary. 4 years of asset records. The partnership operating agreement with the clause that had been sitting there since before our wedding, doing nothing, protecting everything. The folder was finished. I closed it. The proceedings took 9 months. Lauren hired an attorney named Miles Carver. He was competent, thorough. Claire described his approach after his first filing as aggressive but grounded, meaning he was pushing on real weak points, not inventing them. The weak points were limited. He targeted the marital portion of my retirement account, the methodology for valuing my firm stake, and the timing of certain contributions to joint savings. On each one, Claire had the documentation to hold. The firm valuation was the real fight. Carver's appraiser used a methodology that inflated the marital appreciation component by attributing a big chunk of the firm's growth to the period when I was married, arguing I'd benefited from domestic stability in building my reputation and practice. Claire's expert, a business valuation specialist she'd used in dozens of equitable distribution cases, took that argument apart in an 18-page rebuttal citing 7 precedents. Properly calculated, the marital appreciation on my firm stake came to $112,000. Lauren's equitable share of that, $56,000. The house sold in month 6. $750,000, above asking. I'd expected it to go fast. I'd been watching comps in the neighborhood for a year and a half. After mortgage payoff and adjustments for each party's documented contributions to the purchase and upkeep, Lauren received $188,000. I received $221,000. Her firm was appraised at $690,000. The equitable distribution framework treated it the same way it treated mine, as a marital asset, subject to the same accounting. When everything netted out, Lauren's total from the marital estate came to roughly $340,000. My retained separate property, the 2 flat, the protected partnership stake, the premarital retirement, the individual savings, plus my share of the marital estate came to approximately 2.4 million. I'm not describing these numbers as a scoreboard. I'm describing them because they're the result of a process I executed correctly, from a foundation I'd been building for years without knowing exactly when or whether I'd need it. The same way my father's clients wrote wills before they had any plans to die. The shared lease with Garrett Fowler came out during discovery. Claire obtained it as part of the financial disclosure. In the months after the filing, Garrett appeared to become less present in Lauren's professional orbit. That tends to happen with people who make plans that depend on stability and then find out the ground has moved. Lauren moved to an apartment in Andersonville after the house closed. I know because the sale was public record. We haven't spoken since the settlement was finalized. We signed the papers on a Tuesday morning in Claire's office, across a conference table, attorneys on both sides. Afterward, I thanked Claire, drove to a job site in Hyde Park, and spent the afternoon working through a foundation specification that had been submitted wrong and needed correcting before the pour. The correction was straightforward once the right documentation was applied. These things usually are. Philip Caswell called me 3 weeks later. I don't know how he got the timeline, but information moves through that social circle fast, through channels that are informal but efficient. He'd apparently decided a phone call was the right gesture. Owen, heard about you and Lauren. I'm sorry, man. Thanks, Philip. These things happen, you know? They do. For what it's worth, I always thought you two were. He trailed off. Well, you seemed solid. Structures can look solid on the outside when the load points are already compromised. That's why you inspect the internals instead of trusting the facade. Right. A pause. The tone of a man who didn't entirely follow and didn't want to say so. Well, if there's anything Renata and I can do. I appreciate that. Listen, about the dinner. Back in October, I was kind of riding you. And you were being you, Philip. Don't worry about it. Right. Small laugh. Uncertain. The man who says no. Or the man who makes impossible things stand up. Depends on your angle. Yeah, that's true. I haven't talked to him since. The social world organized around Renata and Lauren and Philip and their particular way of living has rearranged itself without me. That's what social systems do. They absorb a missing piece, redistribute the weight, settle into a new shape. I don't miss the dinner parties. I don't miss much of any of it, honestly, though I'm aware that's either clarity or a defense mechanism and I'm not always sure which. I kept the two flat. The lower unit has a tenant now, a second-year graduate student at Northwestern who pays rent on the first without fail. I live upstairs. It's about a third smaller than the Kenilworth house. And quieter. It was mine before Lauren. And it's mine again. That continuity means something to me that I don't fully articulate even to myself. I kept the firm stake. The partnership continues. We landed a significant commercial contract in the spring, a mixed-use development in the South Loop. The developer came through a colleague's referral, someone with no connection to the old social landscape. Our commercial split has grown to 68% of the portfolio. Good work. Clean work. The two flat, the firm, the documentation, the careful architecture of a financial life I assembled over 20 years. None of it was built because I foresaw this specific future. It was built because I build things correctly. I title them correctly. I document them correctly. I keep separate what's separate and joint what's joint. I don't assume that something standing upright today means it'll stand tomorrow. Philip called me the man who says no. I've turned that phrase over a few times since. Not with bitterness. Not weighed down by the memory of that dinner. Just as a phrase, examined from different sides. I think he had it wrong. I'm not the man who says no. I'm the man who says what will hold and what won't. Then I document it. Then I file it. And when the moment comes, I act on it, one step after the next, in the right order. The sequence was never complicated. It just had to exist before the need for it arrived. The need arrived. The preparation was there. That's all a structure really is. What you build before you know what it has to carry.